You know that old saying, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me? Well, what if I told you it's completely scientifically wrong? Today, we're going to dig into some really fascinating and honestly pretty sobering research that shows how our words can leave deep, invisible scars on a child's developing brain. To really get the weight of this, think about it like this. You fall off your bike, you got a scrape. It heals, right? Maybe it fades into a faint little line over the years. But a verbal scar? The science is showing that it can cause actual physical damage to the brain, and that kind of damage can last a lifetime. The wounds we can't see are so often the ones that cut the deepest. Okay, so before we dive into the brain scans and all the science, let's get on the same page. What are we really talking about when we say verbal abuse? What does this invisible harm actually look like? And here's what might be surprising. It's not just about shouting and screaming. Verbal abuse is a whole spectrum of harmful language. It's the constant sarcasm, the little insults that belittle, the threats, the intimidation, and a really big one, just constant criticism and humiliation. Basically, it's any language that chips away at a child's sense of who they are and what they're worth. And the psychological fallout from this it's huge. Studies show that kids who grow up with this are 1.5 times more likely to struggle with depression later on. That is a massive, measurable consequence. But the story doesn't stop there. It gets even deeper. This is where things get really wild. Because of modern technology, we can now literally see what used to be totally invisible. We're moving beyond just psychology and into physiology to see how words can physically reshape the structure of a child's brain. And that's a fair question, isn't it? I mean, how can something you can't even touch, just words, just sound waves, leave a physical mark on the most complex organ in our body? It sounds almost impossible, but the evidence is pretty stunning. Which brings us to this landmark study from Harvard University. A team led by Martin Teicher wanted to answer that exact question. And their conclusion was blunt and honestly chilling. They found that this kind of environment leads to permanent damage that lasts a lifetime, with wounds and scars in the brain. Actual scars. So what did they actually find? Well, they used advanced brain imaging to compare adults who had a history of childhood verbal abuse with those who didn't. And they found two critical structural differences, two huge red flags. First, they found a significant drop in gray matter. The adults who had experienced verbal abuse literally had less of this critical brain tissue. But so what? What does having less gray matter actually mean in real life? Well, gray matter isn't just filler. Think of it as your brain's main computer processor. It's tied directly to things like your IQ, your ability to analyze problems, and your power to think critically. So having less of it can seriously impact your ability to do all of that essential mental heavy lifting. The second finding was just as important. The researchers saw that the connection between the brain's left and right sides, the superhighway of nerves, was underdeveloped. So it's not just about the processing centers. The very communication lines within the brain were physically altered, making it harder for the different parts to work together. This all begs a really important question. Why? Why is a child's brain so incredibly vulnerable to this kind of damage? The answer is all about how a brain is built in the first place. You see, unlike a lot of animals, a huge chunk of human brain development happens after we're born. It's not a finished product at all. It's more like wet clay, constantly being shaped by the world around it. And for that clay to be molded into a strong, healthy brain, it needs positive stuff, care, acceptance, encouragement, and the foundation of it all, unconditional love. So now, let's connect the dots. Let's take these physical changes in the brain and see what they actually look like in the real world, the lifelong consequences for people who live through this. It's really like a tragic domino effect. The first domino is the harsh words. That knocks over the next one, the physical changes to the brain's structure, less gray matter, weaker connections. And that domino then topples the last one, which is all the stuff we see on the outside: depression, anger, anxiety, and even a lower IQ. It's a devastatingly clear chain of events. And on a psychological level, it's just as powerful. Think about it. A kid doesn't just invent their sense of self out of thin air. They figure out who they are by looking in the mirror their parents hold up to them. And if that mirror always reflects someone who is foolish or lazy or a disappointment, that reflection becomes their inner voice for the rest of their life. The long-term effects just ripple outwards: a deep lack of self-confidence, stifled creativity, struggles in school and with friends, and maybe the most heartbreaking of all, an inability to really trust love and affection. Because when you're used to kindness always having a catch, you're always waiting for the other shoe to drop, even with people who genuinely care. Now, I know this all sounds incredibly heavy, but this story is not without hope. Because just as a brain can be harmed, it can also be nurtured and healed. And that brings us to the path forward, making a conscious shift away from criticism and towards compassionate guidance. So what does that actually look like day to day? It boils down to one simple but profound shift. Critique the action, not the child. So instead of saying, "You are so foolish for spilling that," which is an attack on their identity, you say, "That was a mistake. Let's clean it up together." See the difference? It separates who they are from what they did. And look, parents are human. We all mess up. We say things we don't mean. The key isn't being perfect. It's what you do next. Actually acknowledging that what you said was wrong and giving your child a sincere apology. That's incredibly powerful. You're teaching them about accountability, forgiveness, and how to mend relationships. And this core principle, this idea of kindness over harshness, it's universal. You find it echoed in wisdom traditions all across the world. It's this deep understanding that kindness builds things up in a way that violence and harshness just can't. At the end of the day, our kids are a trust. They're placed in our care. And our responsibility is so much bigger than just putting food on the table and a roof over their heads. Our role is to nurture their entire being, their minds, their bodies, and their spirits. And the environment we build with our words is a massive part of that sacred trust. So I'll leave you with this. We are all architects, building the minds of the next generation. And our words are our most important tools. So the question we all have to ask ourselves is, what kind of future are we building with them, one brain at a time?